Before we go any further, if wartime survival is the kind of channel you want more of in your life, make sure you subscribe right now and leave a comment sharing what era or conflict you want us to explore next. This channel exists for serious historians and survival-minded thinkers, and your engagement directly shapes what we produce. Today's subject is not about tactics, weapons, or battles. It is about something far more decisive, the mental endurance that allowed millions to survive the most destructive conflict in human history. World War II was not only a test of nations, logistics, or firepower. It was a prolonged psychological siege on soldiers, civilians, resistance fighters, prisoners, medics, and leaders alike. People lived for years under constant uncertainty, deprivation, trauma, and existential threat. Yet many endured, adapted, and even functioned at remarkably high levels. This guide breaks down how that mental resilience was built, sustained, and weaponized, and how those same principles apply directly to modern survival, crisis leadership, and long-term stress environments today. Why psychological endurance mattered more than physical strength in World War II. Physical endurance could only take someone so far in World War II. Calories ran out, sleep disappeared, medical care collapsed. What kept people going was not strength in the gym sense, but, the ability to mentally regulate fear, despair, and exhaustion. British civilians enduring the Blitz were not superhuman. They were psychologically conditioned by routine, meaning, and collective resolve. German soldiers on the Eastern Front did not survive winters and encirclements through toughness alone. They survived by narrowing their mental focus to the next task, the next hour, the next order. In survival terms, World War II teaches us that mental energy is a finite resource that must be conserved and directed deliberately. Modern application begins with learning to break overwhelming threats into manageable psychological units. When facing prolonged stress today, whether economic collapse, conflict zones, or disaster response, the lesson is to shrink the horizon. Focus attention on what must be done today, not on the full scope of the crisis. So, let's take a moment to consider how meaning, purpose, and routine shaped the experience of so many during the Second World War. These weren't just abstract ideas, but honestly, they became essential tools for survival and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. How meaning and purpose acted as a survival multiplier. One of the clearest psychological patterns across the Second World War is that people who believed their suffering had meaning endured longer and, functioned better. This was visible in resistance movements, prisoner of war camps, and even besieged cities. Polish resistance fighters framed survival itself as an act of defiance. Soviet civilians in Leningrad endured starvation by tying personal survival to national survival. Viktor Frankl later described this dynamic in camps, but it was visible everywhere during the war, meaning reduced psychological fatigue. It prevented learned helplessness. The practical modern lesson is to consciously define why endurance matters before crisis hits. Survivalists and historians alike should note that purpose cannot be improvised under pressure. It must be pre-constructed. In practical terms, this means clearly articulating what you are protecting, who depends on you, and what values you refuse to surrender. Writing this down and revisiting it under stress mirrors how wartime populations reinforced morale through propaganda, ritual, and shared narratives. How routine stabilized minds under extreme uncertainty. Routine was one of the most underestimated psychological weapons of the Second World War. In prisoner of war camps, prisoners who established daily rituals, even meaningless ones, showed higher survival rates and better mental health. In bombed-out cities, civilians who maintain meal times, work schedules, and social habits experienced lower rates of psychological collapse. Routine creates predictability, and predictability reduces fear. For modern survival scenarios, the lesson is straightforward and actionable. Even in chaotic conditions, establish fixed wake times, work periods, rest periods, and personal maintenance rituals. This is not about comfort. It is about neurological stability. The brain functions better when it can anticipate what comes next. World War II shows that routine is not a luxury but a defensive measure against psychological disintegration. Emotional control, social bonds, and adaptability are, well, absolutely vital components of resilience in extreme situations. Maintaining composure under pressure allows for clearer thinking and better decision-making. Strong social connections provide support and motivation, helping individuals to endure hardship together. And of course, adaptability, being willing to adjust routines and expectations, enables survival when circumstances change unexpectedly. These qualities taken together are what truly enable people to withstand and overcome adversity. Now let's consider how emotional suppression and emotional control really differed when it came to surviving the war. Contrary to popular myth, World War II survivors weren't emotionally numb or, fearless. They actually experienced intense fear, grief, and rage. The difference wasn't about suppressing those feelings, but rather about regulating them. Soldiers learned when emotions were useful and when they could be, downright dangerous. Panic during an air raid, for example, could be deadly. But controlled fear, that could actually sharpen your reaction time. Civilians learned to grieve privately and keep functioning in public, simply because public breakdowns could endanger others. The modern takeaway here isn't to deny emotion, but to sort of schedule it. In high-stress environments, it's important to designate safe times and spaces for emotional processing, like journaling, private conversation, or even structured reflection. And outside those windows, the focus remains on function. Now let's consider how social bonds acted as a kind of psychological armor. Isolation, believe it or not, killed people faster than hunger in many World War II environments. Soldiers, more often than not, fought harder for their comrades than for any ideology. Civilians managed to survive sieges through shared suffering and a sense of mutual obligation. Even in the camps, informal leadership and group identity, they actually increased the odds of survival. This all teaches us a pretty critical survival principle. Resilience, in its truest form, is collective. Modern survival planning, often overemphasizes individual skill, while at the same time underestimating our psychological interdependence. And then there's adaptability, how it managed to defeat rigid thinking under prolonged stress. Rigid thinkers, honestly, were the first to break in World War II. Those who clung to pre-war expectations, strict timelines, or moral absolutes without any flexibility, they suffered much deeper psychological shock. The survivors, on the other hand, adapted their expectations rapidly. They redefined what was normal. They adjusted their standards. This adaptability, in the end, protected their mental health. So as we've seen, the journey has been anything but straightforward. Yet in the midst of uncertainty, there remains a sense of controlled hope. It's not about blind optimism, but rather a cautious belief that progress is possible. Perhaps, with continued effort and understanding, we can look forward to a future shaped by the lessons we've learned. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. How controlled hope prevented psychological collapse. Hope in the Second World War was not blind optimism. It was, conditional and controlled. People hoped for survival, not certainty. They hoped for tomorrow, not victory next week. This form of calibrated hope prevented despair without fostering delusion. For modern times, this means setting realistic survival milestones. Focus hope on achievable outcomes. World War II remains the greatest real-world laboratory of human psychological endurance ever recorded. Its lessons are not abstract or inspirational slogans. They are practical, tested, and, well, brutally honest. Mental resilience was not about being fearless or unbreakable. It was about managing fear, sustaining purpose, controlling attention, and leaning on others when isolation threatened collapse. These principles remain as relevant now as they were under falling bombs and frozen front lines. If this deep dive added value to your understanding of wartime survival and human resilience, subscribe to Wartime Survival, share this video with fellow historians and survivalists, and comment below with the next topic you want analyzed at this level. This channel is built for those who take history seriously and use it to prepare for the future.